Hey Rybolt, thanks for your videos on Crick and Cock's theories of consciousness. And it's so easy to criticize science from the outside, so I can't really engage in that kind of a thing. I mean, I can just do philosophy and admit the experiments and the data which various scientists have collected. So when we try to understand consciousness, obviously the first thing we have to do is ask, what is it? And it seems almost as though we could talk about this in terms of free will and determinism. Consciousness is that which is free, which is not the physiochemical processes of the brain and electrophysiochemical processes of the brain. Consciousness is what's controlling that, sometimes at least. And even, Crick and Cock admit this, right? Consciousness is some pattern in the brain that seems to become aware. And maybe it only becomes aware after it has already acted. But still, as Benjamin Libet said, based on his experiment that showed consciousness lags behind, our motor response to interacting with the world, so that we only learn what we do after we've already started doing it, and then we assume we did it. But we do have veto power, as Libet said. We can shut down the beginnings of the motor response. So Crick and Cock, I think, would admit that, yeah, this synchronous firing of various regions of, whether it's an amygdala, prefrontal cortex relation, or, whatever the synchronous areas need to be to light up that correlate with this conscious experience, we call it, that must somehow give us veto power, at least. So in this sense, when we say consciousness, we're talking about that ego center, that I that decides, or at least resists, the I that tenses up and gets nervous and anxious and can say, no, I shouldn't act, I shouldn't do that, I shouldn't do this, that keeps rejecting the brain's, the evolutionarily older brain's suggestions about, you should do this, and say the prefrontal cortex, just to simplify, says, no, I don't think I should do that right now. And it looks around suspiciously, and some other message comes up, and it's like, you should go talk to her, and then the prefrontal cortex says, oh no, I didn't even, I probably didn't shower, so, and another message comes up, and it's like, oh, I'm kind of hungry, but nah, it's too late, I'll wait a little bit longer just for dinner. And so you're constantly doing this, and the prefrontal cortex never can actually decide. It has to receive a message and accept it to actually do anything. Otherwise it's not free at all. It's the president, the guy that gets to stamp the legislation and say it's good, or say, nah, send it back. And there, it's a legitimate way to describe that brain function, I guess. But maybe consciousness isn't just that. Maybe we do have experience of something other than what our language explicitly tells us is happening. Because, yeah, in our language, we always talk about, I did this or that, and you did that, and the other thing, and we assign agency to ourselves and responsibility to ourselves, but it's not that we don't have those things like we describe them, like we consider ourselves in the court of law as having rights and responsibilities. We can interact with the world like that meaningfully. We do it every day. But we have access to other, types of consciousness, modes of consciousness. Besides the ego, we have emotion, intuition, we have imagination, we have, mathematics, which I think is a branch of the imagination, really. These are all different ways of perceiving the world. These are all different identities we can take on. And I think, in a spiritual sense, we all have a particular mode of consciousness, or, a particular identity that is somehow transcendent. And obviously we can't talk about it, because the talk. I mean, it's not the language thing. You know, it's not something that can be expressed that way. It's not in that mode of consciousness. It's in a silent mode of consciousness. And you know, we have a bias today. If you can't speak it, if you can't say it, especially if you can't say it rationally, it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. You know, like Galileo's maxim: anything that can be measured is real, and anything that can't is non-existent. You know, he didn't say that exactly, but basically, we need to open up to more forms of consciousness. And when you do that, after you've explained, you know, the ego consciousness, which is probably one of the less glorious, simpler modes of consciousness that we have at the end of the day, you know, it can accomplish a certain task for us. It's definitely good to, you know, not always leap to action. You should second guess yourself sometimes, because after all, being intelligent has got to be worth something. But it's not the one in charge by any means, and we shouldn't identify with only an ego. That usually causes some sort of pathology, some sort of repression, because there's all this other stuff going on. And if your brain doesn't incorporate it, because this particular type of you know, evolutionarily young brain, gray matter wants to reject everything you want to do, I mean, it's going to drive the whole thing out of whack. So, you know, we're really, our consciousness, it's a whole team of players. We're all schizophrenic, really, and the trick is not to let any particular voice in your head take control over the others, or at least make sure each voice earns its stay. You know, make sure that if there is a hierarchy that develops between the various, you know, processors, you could say, of your consciousness. I mean, and not just in your brain. I mean, your heart's got neurons, your gut has neurons. There's brains everywhere in this body, and they're all conscious in their own way. And what we call our person is the aggregate or the conglomeration of these entities. And, you know, our freedom comes from their cooperation, just as you know, our freedom as persons comes from our cooperation as well. We should be studying the brain exactly as Crick and Koch are, or Crick, you know, was, and Koch continues to. We should take the reductionistic approach and just stick to what we can, you know, physically correlate with, you know, something else, something that can be measured very easily and specifically and, you know, explicitly. But I don't think that that's going to explain everything. But it is exactly what some particular scientist should be doing, and I'm glad that Koch is doing it, and other scientists like him are doing it. But I'm also glad that, you know, some people are doing forms of phenomenology, because to understand neural correlates of consciousness, you don't only need to know the neuron part, you need to know the consciousness part. And consciousness is experiential. And as I've been saying, it's not just that ego, you know, vetoing mind, the prefrontal cortex. It's the rest of our experience as well. And then unless we understand how to relate to it, it'll malfunction. It'll you know, the gears will get clogged up, and it'll make us jerky in life. You know, we'll be a little too anxious. Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to continue talking about free will and determinism, though, and how we should relate ourselves to it. You know, because I'm open to understanding this in different ways. But at the end of the day, it seems like it's a false dichotomy to begin with. Of course, there are certain things that are determined. You know, we don't decide consciously, at least, what kind of body we have, you know, what kind of genes we have, who our parents are, what historical period we were born in, and such. You know, these happen to us, and from these cards that we are dealt, we play the best hand that we can. But there is that playing the hand as well. There is that freedom, of course. We are potentialities. Especially together, when we share ideas, we can create new worlds. And so there's nothing determined. Nobody knows what's going to happen you couldn't, because, you know, to measure everything perfectly, you would have to interfere with everything. And so it wouldn't be what it was going to be before you decided to measure it. So there is always the element of freedom. But it's freedom in determinism. You know, it's autonomy in communion with other autonomies. And so there has to be a degree of sharing for anything to get done. But there is certainly a degree of sharing. I mean, human society is still learning how to do it, but, you know, the rest of nature has been doing it beautifully for billions of years, and we could certainly learn a lesson or two from our own genes, I think. All that consciousness is in there. We just ignore most of it for this ego, for our opinions and such. But anyways, thanks for your video, and thanks for listening. Take it easy.